Hey, good morning. Welcome to Pagitt Radio, broadcasting live out of the Twin Cities. Today, June 6th edition of the show. Going it alone around here over at the radio program. Victoria Lynn, our capable and fantastic sidekick, has a couple of weeks off for some things she's got going on. But I'm going to have some great guests on today. Peter Wallace has written a book called The Passionate Jesus, a picture of Jesus with full emotions, not a bad idea. And also Kyle Roberts, who's written a book called Emerging Prophet, Kierkegaard, and the Postmodern People of God. Pagitt Radio, Theological Nerd Edition of the show. Hey, really glad to have you all around. A quick update here. My race went great on Saturday and Sunday of this week. Did a 24-hour race. It's not about miles. It's about time. I wanted to go 100 miles. Gave myself a 15% discount, went 85 over 24 hours. But an incredible endeavor and a great thing to participate in. Getting a late start today, so I'll tell you more about that in future weeks. Wasn't quite as transcendent, beautiful, wonderful, life-changing as the 50-mile, but in its own way, magical. Going for 24 hours and with all the good help of people that came around and all. So it was a terrific time. Thanks to all of you for your support. And if you're interested in getting into ultra marathon running, I'm going to do a little sermon on this on Sunday. I'm going to be the guest preacher at Mars Hill Church in Michigan, and I'm going to do a little sermon they asked me to do on the spirituality of running. So I've been putting together my thoughts on the spirituality of running, called Pathology. Path with a little hyphen, squiggly line, hyphen. Ology. Cute, huh? Like a pathology, but it's like theology, but on the path and run. Well, if you didn't get the point already, I don't think there's really much of a point in me explaining to you. I'm going to give a jingle to Peter Wallace. Peter is the author of the book, The Passionate Jesus, and he's also day1.org, and at over at day1.org, he's the person who makes a lot of other radio happen. So he is a radio personality, a kingmaker himself. So we'll talk a little bit about Day One, and we will also talk about his book, The Passionate Jesus, what we can learn from Jesus about love, fear, grief, joy, and living authentically. So we'll give Peter a call. Really glad to have him on the show. On the show today, it's going to be a great honor.
Hello.
Hey, Peter, Doug Pagitt. Thanks for being on the show today. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing just great. Doing just great. Really thrilled for you being on the show today, both the work that you do over at day1.org, but also this terrific book you put together, The Passionate Jesus. So,
Thank you.
So thanks for being on the show.
Great to be with you.
Tell us a little bit about what you're thinking about with this book. The subtitle is What We Can Learn from Jesus About Love, Fear, Grief, Joy, and Living Authentically.
Well, one of the things that I have struggled with, I guess, over my own Christian life, I guess it goes back to when I was, how I was raised, raised in a Christian home. My father was a Methodist minister, but I remember my parents taking us kids to the movies when I was a kid, and I remember the greatest story ever told with, somebody who really looks like Jesus, Max von Sydow, the European actor with blue eyes and all like that. And Jeffrey Hunter also played Jesus in the King of Kings. And so you kind of get this image from Sunday school illustrations and stained glass windows of this Jesus that is hard to relate to.
Right.
He's not very human. He kind of floats above everybody else, and he doesn't laugh, and he doesn't cry and doesn't do anything. So I kind of took that as a Christ-like approach to understanding Jesus, which ended up meaning that I stuffed my emotions, and that causes all kinds of problems. And I was going through a rough time personally a few years ago, and was dealing with some issues in my personal life. I was dealing with some anger and grief and fear and really struggling with all that. And I took a retreat, and I decided to, even though I was kind of spiritually blocked at the time, I tried to read the Gospels kind of as fresh as I could. And what I discovered as I was reading this time were the emotions of Jesus that just really kind of popped off the page for me, where he, was very angry or even ticked off with his close friends, his disciples, or he was grieving or weeping.
Mm-hmm.
All these emotions that made him so accessible to me, and I really sensed that, oh, this is somebody I can relate to, who understands what I'm feeling because he's felt it too. And so I tried to capture some of that in the book as I work through the various emotions that we all deal with, anger and grief and fear and love and joy, positive emotions as well, and find out, how did Jesus experience these emotions, and what um, what did he do in response to those emotions when other people were angry at him or grieving or whatever? And then what did he teach about these emotions? And it really kind of opened my own eyes to find the human Jesus, who I can relate to and I can understand. And it's been gratifying because I've had several people who have told me that this approach has really kind of bolstered their own faith as they have struggled themselves with, who is Jesus and how do I relate to
Yeah,
Jesus?
it really is something, isn't it? That a person can be religiously engaged and faithful and learning about Jesus and still have a sense that sometimes the human emotions, the human emotional range and struggle is actually something that that they feel is contrary to their their faith. It's an interesting thing, isn't it? Do you think all through time, when people have read the stories of Jesus or tried to live out the Jesus life, that they have struggled with Jesus not feeling to them to be totally human? And if you're going to replicate Jesus, you might want to do it morally, but not as a as a fully emotional person?
I think that's a great question. Obviously, over the centuries, the church has struggled with the theology of Jesus, who Jesus is in terms of both God and human. And but I think, it's funny because I was teaching a Sunday school class several months ago on this, and I was trying to make the case that understanding Jesus's emotions can help us relate better to Jesus. And I noticed a woman kind of squirming in her seat, and she finally raised her hand and said, well, why emotion? She said, if I expressed all the emotions that I feel, I would be divorced and jobless, and
That's right.
So, and I try to explain it is a difficult thing because emotions can get out of control. Jesus, I don't think, ever crossed the line. What we find in his emotions is that, yes, he may have been angry, but it was for a purpose. And he may have expressed emotions, but he never crossed the line where it became harmful or difficult for other people. What we find is that he was just totally honest and transparent with how he felt. No matter what the situation, no matter who he was with, whether it was his own disciples or followers, or whether it was the religious authorities who were trying to trick him and trap him, or who, even the woman who so lovingly massaged his feet with her hair and aromatic oil and so forth. Anyone that he was in contact with, you knew exactly where he stood. He was utterly honest and authentic. And I think that's what we can get from our understanding of his emotions, is how to first of all recognize our own emotional state and why, and then to be honest with those. When Jesus, for instance, was struggling with fear in the Garden of Gethsemane, he asked for the support of his disciples, the prayers and stay with him and all like that. So we need to know what we need in those times. We need to be able to express those feelings in authentic, clear ways without going over the line.
Yeah,
So I
and,
think Jesus is a great model
yeah, and I'm not an expert in the history of the psychology of emotions and all. Maybe you've studied a bit more of that, but it does seem to me that we live in a time where we like separate every emotion as its own category from other emotions. And I wonder if, say, first century spirituality just didn't organize the world around like the difference between hope and fear, but that and maybe that's sort of the product of a kind of psychological framing of the human experience, because I think one of the things you get after in the book is this notion of living authentically, as opposed to having a new checklist of all the things that one ought to be, right? Where don't read the Gospels and then say, well, everything Jesus did, I have to do, and so I'm going to now go through and be angry if he was angry, and I should be joyful if he's joyful or whatever. But it's more, it feels to me like the call of your book is, how does a person live authentically and allow all the kind of engagement and experiences of their life to count and to matter and to be a part of what it means to be a faithful person, as opposed to coming up with a new list of Jesus activities that we should now endeavor into.
Right.
Do I have you right on that?
I think you're exactly right. And unfortunately, the structure of the book was a little bit frustrating for me, because we did take a look at each emotion individually. But the problem is, when you look at the stories that illustrate primarily the emotion, say, of grief,
yep,
Jesus is obviously also expressing love and
that's right, yeah,
fear and anger at death and its impact on people, for instance, at the raising of Lazarus. And so all these emotions are of whole cloth. And I think you're exactly right that we just need to be in touch with who we are, how we're feeling, and be authentic and real and true to ourselves as God made us, and to one another. And so while we do kind of highlight the different emotions, I think you're right. I think probably in the time of Jesus, there was no psychology of emotions where you looked at the individual pieces. It becomes kind of a flowing thing, and it's fascinating when you read the Gospels. And sometimes you have to kind of use your spiritual imagination to read between the lines sometimes.
Yes,
but obviously the Gospels present a lot of clues as to what the emotions were going on. But you see Jesus kind of just moving through whatever encounter he is, and it's just and it's a beautiful thing when you kind of are attuned to what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, it feels to me like you get this picture of Jesus living this kind of full humanity, right? And obviously, Gospels they're not all that long. It's kind of a shock to people who are maybe new to the Bible to not know that, you can read the Gospels, a whole Gospel, in pretty short order. They're not an overly long book, and they don't describe everything of a person's life. All right, they're telling a certain they're telling a certain narrative, but it really does have this feel, doesn't it, that Jesus wants to represent this kind of humanity that lives in a wholeness with oneself and with God and with those around you, and this may be a bad analogy, but I know that there's some indigenous peoples to Alaska who, Eskimos, who have like 19 words for snow, right? Because the snow is a really big deal, right? So they'll divide up different kinds of snow. And in Minnesota, we'll have 3 or 4 words for snow. And people who live in Atlanta, they don't need 3 or 4 words for snow. They get snow and that's it, right? It's either rain or yeah, it's like rain or snow. It's the thing you don't want. It's why you live there. But so in the Gospels, they might divide up a person's sensibility differently than we do now. We'll divide up all the emotions, sort of like the indigenous Eskimos would about, snow, into really precise difference. And I hear people struggling sometimes with like, I want to be a person of passion, but I don't want that passion to transition into, obsession or into fear of failure. And And boy, it feels like Jesus's narrative should say something to us about like live the fullness of your life and don't overly control every input and output quite so much. And I think that your book, The Passionate Jesus, really calls us to live a full life.
I think you put that very, very well, Doug. At the end of the book, I riff a little bit about what theologian Walter Wink has written about Jesus. He called, Jesus loved to call himself the Son of Man, and we kind of over the years have wondered what did he mean by that? But Wink talks about that he was the human being, the utterly human being. In other words, that we can follow. He was a human who fully expressed humanity within himself, and the emotions and the authenticity is part of that we can see. God is not calling us to be something we're not, divine, but God is calling us to be fully human in every aspect, and I think Jesus is an example of that.
Yeah, it's funny. We're at the church that I'm a part of. We're currently just finished reading the book of Mark, and the book of Mark uses that phrase a lot, the Son of Man, kind of in contrast, really, to the Son of God, right? And I mean, that's something the Christians have had to figure out over time, where Jesus says that he's the representative of the new humanity. But the translation of the Bible that we use, the Common English Bible, this new one, uses the phrase "the human one." In place of the Son of Man. And there's a lot of us who every time that's being read, like Jesus would say, and the human one's going to be betrayed and turned over, it really feels like it's diminishing what Son of Man, because Son of Man gets to be like a religious term of a title,
right?
Where the human one feels like, oh, no, I don't think that really gets at it. And there's something where we want to separate our human experience from the Jesus experience, which almost seems to be the very thing that the Gospels want to call us not to do. But boy, it is a hard thing to negotiate sometimes.
It is, and I think that Common English Bible version, I think reveals, and your reaction to it reveals our own frustration with our humanness. We do feel lacking as humans. And I think God is telling us, no, there's a whole lot more that you can be as humans. And just look at Jesus' life, because he was the human one, the utterly holy human one. And so, yeah, that I can understand your kind of frustration.
Yeah, and there's something weird, isn't it? Like, I'm not just a Billy Joel theologian, but there's kind of that, you're only human. Don't let it hold you back, and you need to be more than human, and it really feels like that Christianity wants to ask some questions, not only about what does it mean to be a child of God, but what does it mean to be a human being in a meaningful way, in the world that we live in, and that's something that obviously the work that you do with writing and being. Are you a priest? Do I have that right?
I was ordained many years ago in an independent tradition. I'm in the process, so I was ordained, but I'm in the process toward ordination in the Episcopal priesthood. Hopefully within the year that will happen, a year or so.
Yes.
So and that's been an incredible journey, which has been helpful to discern, my own gifts, my own limitations, my own calling in all this, and to see, how I can follow in the example of Jesus. The other thing that's so important, I think, when we understand this Jesus who is passionate and authentic, is that it's always for a purpose. He constantly calls us to serve in God's name, and everything is for the purpose of bringing about God's justice and action and social justice and so forth. And I think it's so easy to get tied up in our emotions, and that's not the purpose of this book, is kind of get stuck in our own feelings and so forth. It's to clarify who we are as God's children, and then follow the call that God has for us, as all of us, as believers, as followers of Jesus, to be in the world and bringing about the reign of God in the world. And so that takes on, uh, even speaking out, standing up, taking action, serving,
Mm-hmm.
loving, reaching out to those in need, and providing help. That's the purpose. It's not just so we feel good about
Right.
ourselves and
Yeah. Right.
understand our emotions better. It's to equip ourselves to be real people in the world that is in such need.
And do you have, being from somebody who was in a tradition that was more of a sort of independent Christian tradition, it feels like in that world the difference between like a church attender or member and the pastor is feels a little closer than what a lot of people think. It feels like in a tradition where the church leader is a priest, like in the Episcopal Church or the Catholic Church or the Orthodox Church. Um, how have you thought about that? Have you does it feel odd to you to like move into a category of religious service that is so distinct from the sort of common person's life? Going through a process of being ordained or set apart as a priest, as opposed to doing some other things. Tell me a little bit about that process that went into that for you, and how that impacted the way you're thinking about what you did in the Passion at Jesus.
Well, that has been a constant source of meditation and figuring out, why am I doing this? When I was ordained many years ago in a Bible church tradition, at the time, my calling was not to a church ministry, but I've always been involved in church, but it was to a ministry of communication. And so I've done that in various ways, most recently over the past 12 years with the Day One radio program. But I became an Episcopalian, gosh, it's been 23 years ago now, and discovered, the tradition that I was raised was liturgical, the Methodist Church, and I went. I guess I went conservative a little bit because I found the more rigid structures, belief structures, the black and white, right and wrong, to be safer.
Yeah.
With my own. It's just easy. I was dealing with personal issues, and it's just easy to know, that's wrong. So just don't do it. But that doesn't work well over time. And in the Episcopal Church, I found by accident one Sunday morning, it was a combination of the beauty of the liturgy, which was so worshipful to me, and really took me into a place closer to God than I think I'd ever experienced. Along with the warmth of the community. The rector at the time as well was just a brilliant preacher who just stretched us intellectually as well as spiritually, and pushed us to in challenges to serve and rethink, what is the Spirit doing today, and so forth. So to me, that became really a fulfillment of what I kind of had always wanted church to be. So as I became more involved and involved in parish ministry, sort of, even though I was an ordained person, I was considered a lay person in the Episcopal Church, and I'm not sure I can articulate it, Doug, as to why, because I understand, and the Episcopal Church and other denominations and so forth that have those kind of structures of, priest and deacon and so forth, are wrestling with that, because we are all believers, we are all ministers of Christ. There is no difference in that. There are people in whatever tradition who have been set aside in one way or another to to provide some sort of oversight or leadership. But what is that going to look like in this time of really upheaval in the
Mm-hmm.
church? And what is the church? I have a post on Huffington Post today on the religion page about, where is church going, and the institutions are changing
Mm-hmm.
so rapidly, and what are we to do about it? And as someone who's now very institutionalized, and in
Uh,
the process of being institutionalized as a leader of this particular tradition, or in the priest sense, I think it's something we all have to kind of wrestle with. You're doing some amazing work
Thank you.
in your church. I mean, and I love what's going on in some of the emergent activities and so forth. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from each other. I find it a very exciting time
Mm-hmm.
to be in the church. Phyllis Tickle has said this comes around about every 500 years or so. And so I think we're blessed to be in this time where we can start to see some of the unfolding of what's coming.
Mm.
And the thing that I keep coming back to is, I think the church walls have tended to uh, keep us in a safe environment,
Mm-hmm.
instead of providing an opportunity to be formed together, be equipped together, encourage each other to go beyond those walls and go out in Jesus' name.
Yeah,
In,
and it feels like one of the things that I think you're tapping into, both in the work you do and in the book. I think there's a lot of people whose religious experience is sort of built around, well, there are these like exceptional religious people, these people who are really good at being faithful. And they get to be pastors and priests and preachers, and they get to be those people, right? And they're real, and there's a higher ethic and a higher standard for those people to live more Christianly than
mm-hmm.
everyone else. Strangely, we don't live in a world where the clergy, the people who are in those roles, the priests and the pastors and the preachers, they're not the ones advocating that view, right? They're not,
Right.
everyone I know, people like you and me, we're not saying like, hey, you should give us a little more respect. We're actually the real religious people here.
Correct.
It's, but there still does feel like in our culture, this distinction between the like professional grade religious people and just your average run of the mill religious person. And that's what I think something like the your book, The Passion of Jesus, is trying to say to people, like, look, the authentic life that we're called to live is not the exceptional life of the professional class.
Mm-hmm.
It's really the call of God on all of us to live as engaged human beings in the life of God as a benefit and blessing to the world, all of us, together. And frankly, some of our traditions have, elevated, the independent churches elevated the preacher to sort of a place of special honor. And certainly,
Right.
The priesthood has tended to do that with people. But boy, it feels like there's a real shift happening now amongst the people in those categories to say, we're not special. We're part of this like the rest of you. And it seems like that's exactly what the Gospels want to be saying about Jesus, right? That people wanted to elevate Jesus as the special one, and Jesus says, hey, you people are the salt of the earth. You people are the light of the world. Not just the elite class of the teachers or rabbis or anyone else. It's really it's really all of us.
Exactly. We believe in the priesthood of all believers, and that may kind of throw off some lay persons.
Yeah.
I'm a priest, but
Right.
you're a priest. You're the minister, but you're absolutely right. This is what we are all called together to do, and sometimes some people are set apart to, provide resources to enable that,
Right. Right.
and ordination and teaching and leading and so forth. But and I think all religious professionals need to be very, very careful about this, because it is so easy to fall into that trap of, well, I just know more than you. I've been to seminary. I have the degrees. You really need me to help you do what you're supposed to be doing. And it just, that's I think antithetical to what Jesus is all about, as you just said.
Yeah, it's quite fun. Okay, well, tell us a little bit about the other work you do. You're not just a soon-to-be priest and a fantastic author, but you do work with day1.org. Tell us a little bit about that.
Day One is we have a website, and we do a weekly radio program that is a half hour. It's been on the air. We're on about 200 radio stations across the country. It's been on the air actually since 1945, every week since 1945. It used to be called the Protestant Hour, and some folks may remember that. And it was a platform that was put together by several of the mainline denominations at the time, the Presbyterians, Lutherans, Methodists, and Episcopalians, to get their message out on the emerging technology of the time, radio.
Yeah, right.
In the 40s.
Right. At the end of the war, apparently, if it was 1945,
that's
there was
right. The
things
beginning
we're
of
looking
the
up.
big mainline resurgence, in the 50s and so forth. And so what we do on our weekly program is we feature ministers from the broad range of moderate to progressive mainline churches. We've gone beyond those initial four, and basically anybody who kind of fits in. We, like you, are religious radio that's not right. It's a different voice in the radio. There's so many of the more conservative preachers on radio and so forth, and so we proclaim what we call the passionate, positive message of the mainline churches. And so we have preachers come in. We record usually at least once a week, or it just depends on schedules, and they come from all over. We record a sermon. We do opening and closing interviews, and that, of course, is podcast as well.
So these are sermons that people might preach in their local congregation, and you do an intro with them and an outro, and then the sermon is one that they would have preached at their churches most commonly?
Most commonly, yes, but a lot of them just, because they're preaching to this broader audience, we get, very loyal listeners who tune in. Sometimes this is their only church. I've been gratified. I've heard from 3 atheists in the past few years who accidentally tuned in on a Sunday morning to the program, thinking, they were going to hear another droning Christian preacher that could put them back to sleep. But they discovered that we were talking about, inclusion and welcoming and, serving others and interfaith efforts and, all that sort of thing. And so it was so funny because the 3 of them all have said basically the same thing. I probably won't become a believer, but I'm just glad to know there are Christians out there who believe like this.
Yeah, it's fun.
They're just not aware of this message very often in the media. So we have a great time. We have a number of well-known preachers. We have young preachers. We have retired priests. We have the whole breadth of kinds of people who preach on the program, and we have a good time talking with them. And we also do videos with them, doing a reflection on something or other that we put on our website. The website has blogs and videos and all sorts of things. So
it's all at day1.org.
That's correct.
And so how do you feel, Peter, in your role as someone who's public in your faith? You're in obviously a local expression, and you have your own life and all, but then you work in this sort of cross traditional world and way. How do you think Christianity's faring in culture and in North America? What's your take on it? How do you think it is? How do you think it's going? Do you feel good? Do you feel like, well, we got a lot of work to do? Do you feel a little up and down? With all the good people you get to hear and interact with and all of that, a lot of people only live in a pretty small experience of Christianity in the world, or of any faith or of any tradition. Somebody like you who sees a broad scope, what's your take?
Well, it's kind of all of the above. Some days are better than others in terms of how the church
Right.
is faring. What I've found in talking with these various leaders from all over the country is that the local church is alive and well. Our structures are changing. The denominational hierarchies
Mm.
are kind of collapsing, and the rep that Christianity has in the media in many cases is very bad these days. It seems that the media tends to focus on the wackos,
Right.
on any issue. Uh, and the troubles of the Roman Catholic Church, for instance, but I think Pope Francis is bringing a breath of fresh air
Yeah.
there
Right.
that is startling people, and it's like the message of Jesus is finally getting through in some of the things that he's saying and doing. So I think it's what I think though, Doug, is that it's a hopeful time. I think the more people become aware of what's going on in terms of some of these other expressions of church, the emergent
Hmm.
church, some of the more open-minded uh, churches in the mainline traditions and so forth, they're saying, oh, um, I can believe in Jesus and God and have these views and be morally responsible
Yeah.
without some of this other baggage.
Yeah.
One of the things recently when Anne Rice came out
Right.
and announced that she was quitting the church because it's anti-women, it's anti-gay, it's
Hmm.
this, and I just wanted to scream, but what about all these other
Right.
churches,
That aren't.
that
Well,
that
and
are
that's something that I find curious. I heard from some of the church consultants and church futurists back in the 1960s, 1950s, and 1960s, who really predicted, look, culture is going to become increasingly more open and progressive as education and globalization and just the stretching of minds is going to be happening across North American culture. There was really a thought that progressive religion would sit better inside of a culture that was itself becoming more open and informed and progressive. And, by most standards, you would say that, American culture, North American culture as a whole, maybe, United States culture is just more progressive than it ever used to be. But funny enough, progressive religion isn't as attractive in this culture as people would have thought that it was. Doesn't that? I mean, I just sometimes look at it as a sociologist, and and think that's a curious thing. You would think that, with people bemoaning how liberal America has become, that the expression of Christianity that has an open kind of religious, and a progressive kind of minded religious viewpoint would sit really well. But boy, it seems like progressive religion is struggling as much now as ever to really get a voice. Do you have any sense I mean, am I totally off on that,
no,
or?
no, I think that's part of an overall uh, deinstitutionalizing of our culture.
Oh, so you
I see
think that the
so
progressive
many.
Christianity has
I
been
think
wrapped up
it's.
in institutionalism more than maybe it
I think
needed to be?
I think it's maybe
Huh.
more a reaction to the
Interesting.
institutionalism of religion of whatever stripe,
Wow.
because you see so many institutions.
Oh.
The newspaper industry,
Mm-hmm.
the network, the TV networks, whose ratings are just plummeting because people um,
Mm.
are finding other ways to get what they want in terms
Hmm.
of news or opinion or whatever. And so there's this kind of flattening out of
Hmm.
all kinds of institutions, and that includes the religious institutions. The thing that the church needs to wrestle with is, how do we cope with this and reinvent, not necessarily reinvent ourselves, but do what we're supposed to be doing in different
Huh.
ways. And I think I heard Diana Butler Bass, who's just a phenomenal writer. Her book Christianity After Religion very insightful. But she was looking at the last election, and she found a study that broke down by ages various views. And as you note, the younger the 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 person, the more open-minded
Yeah.
they tend to be. Now, with age, some of that may change, but it's an amazing phenomenon, where more progressive people are more interested in interfaith rather than a
Mm-hmm.
particular brand.
Mm-hmm.
They see the value in all sorts of different approaches to God and religion and so forth. And so I think we need to understand that that is a phenomenon we're experiencing, and our institutions will go away as they currently are structured. And
Mm.
we can accept that and move on and do what we need to do and still celebrate the
Yeah.
richness of worship and so forth. But
Yeah,
it's
and I don't want
it's
to. I don't want to monopolize your whole day, so I know you have to go. But I have one more thought. Like, what do you think it is about progressive theology, progressive ideas, a way of thinking about God that seems to be so correspondent with the Bible, but is open and invitational, expansive? Why does that progressive theology often find itself only expressed inside of conservative institutions, right?
yeah,
Institutions that are themselves. It's almost, and then you get the conservative theology that finds itself packaged inside of very open institutions. Like, why can't we find the open theology inside of the open structures? What does it? Is it like one part of the system has to stay conservative? Is there something about that? Because it is very curious to me that, I mean, I'm around pastors sometimes who'll be like, look, you should have a very open understanding about God. You should
yeah,
think about God in fresh ways, because we know that over time we've changed in our understanding of God and humanity. But let's not change how we do anything around here. And then other churches are more conservative in their theology, be like, we should totally change our methodology, but never change the message.
yeah.
It's
No,
a,
I think that is probably the million-dollar question. And I mean, it's interesting. I think it's happening, Doug. I think it really is. It's going
good.
to be slow and it's going to be painful. But I was talking to the chief operating officer of the Episcopal Church, who, oversees the structure of the Episcopal Church,
Wow.
and his whole aim is to reinvent the structure of this particular denomination in such a way that the
Wow.
mission is the focus.
Hmm.
And I think, and he's doing some amazing things. Is very early in the process, but I think you're going to see some changes
Hmm.
in the institutions. But at the same time, there's some phenomenal things going on with very open structures that offer this more progressive, open-minded
Hmm.
approach to faith, without those structures.
Hmm.
Meetings in other places, outdoor
Yeah.
meetings, some of the stuff that's happening online, Darkwood Brew and that sort of thing. I mean, there's a lot of things going on, and I think we're it's like turning around a aircraft carrier. It's
Right.
going to take a long time, and I probably won't see wherever it ends up. But the important thing, I think, is that we individually you get ourselves,
Hmm.
our own callings, our own gifts, our own
Hmm.
authentic being kind of in order, and then find that community of faith that enables us to fulfill that, to be wholly human in terms of knowing and loving God and serving humanity. I
Hmm.
think if we all were busy doing that, we wouldn't worry so much about the
I love it.
structures.
Love it. Well, and that's what people will get if they pick up the passion of Jesus, and I hope they do. What we can learn from Jesus about love, fear, grief, joy, and living authentically. That's the Reverend Peter Wallace. Also find him in the work that they do over at day1.org. Peter, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Doug, it's a pleasure, and keep up the great work.
Same to you. Right on. We'll talk with you soon.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Hey, that's fun. Great little book. You should give a shout out to that at your local bookstore. Pick it up. See if people around there find it interesting. I think they will. Stick with us here. We're going to come back with Kyle Roberts. So roll over to the next video and to the next Spreaker posting. Talk to you in a second.